Some see it as Bolshevism, others as a triumph of liberal democracy. Others probably just think it's a nice thing to do. In the harvest of 1921, the American welfare state is born. This is Between Two Wars Season 2, a chronological summary of the interwar years, where we cover the zeitgeist, the culture, the technology, the art, the sports, and much more in the era when, for better or for worse, humanity ushered in modern times. I'm Indy Neidell. There is more diploma this season suggesting the world may be settling into the post-war era. Powers at the Washington Naval Conference agree to respect the status quo in the Pacific and will later agree to scale down their warship building, a hopeful step towards global disarmament. Though hardly coming in peaceful circumstances, new states are also legitimized this season. The Anglo-Irish Treaty provides for the establishment of the Irish Free State as a self-governing dominion of the British Empire, and Turkey, still technically the Ottoman Empire, settles its borders with the Soviet republics of Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. Finally, two more career developments for future world leaders. Crown Prince Hirohito becomes regent of Japan, and Benito Mussolini forms his National Fascist Party. Meanwhile, another future leader is adjusting to a new and pretty unwelcome life in New York City. At still only 39, Franklin Roosevelt has already had a pretty successful political career. He was a state senator in New York in 1911, assistant secretary of the Navy in 1913, and even Democratic candidate for vice president in the 1920 election, running alongside presidential hopeful James Cox. They were defeated, of course, by Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge, who are currently president and vice president. And following all that, Roosevelt returned to New York City to practice law and work on his political comeback. But these plans are struck down when he unexpectedly developed a paralytic illness in August this year. He is completely immobilized from the waist down and left with a host of other symptoms such as fever, loss of bladder control, and hypersensitivity of the skin. The diagnosis is polio, and it's a disease his name will forever be associated with. But retrospective analysis will actually suggest it to be Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare autoimmune disorder. Either way, he's suffering from a debilitating condition. At the end of October, he has moved from the hospital to his home on East 65th Street. His other symptoms have subsided, and to everyone's relief, he is at least able to sit up unassisted. His doctors have also assured him that he is still capable of having sex. In December, he begins working with a physical therapist, but it will take him a very long time to accept that his legs are permanently immobilized, and he will research all types of methods to help him walk again. Over the rest of the decade, he will remain active in political life, maintaining political contacts, and using his famous name to support causes and campaigns. He will also learn to partially move with crutches and leg braces and grudgingly accept that he must sometimes use a wheelchair. His comeback will be assured in 1928 when he successfully runs for governor of New York. Just a few years after that, he will be elected president of the United States. When that day comes, one of his lasting legacies will be his role in creating the modern American welfare state in his New Deal era of the 1930s. Now, the 1920s will largely be a time of political conservatism in the States. So it is interesting that the first major piece of federal social welfare legislation goes into effect this November. Officially titled the Promotion of the Welfare and Hygiene of Maternity and Infancy Act, the Sheppard-Towner Act is also the first dividend of universal suffrage. It originated in a bill introduced in 1918 by Jeannette Rankin, the first woman to hold federal office in the United States. It was in reaction to the finding that America has unusually high infant and maternal mortality rates. Out of 1,000 births, between 85 and 100 infants die before reaching their first birthday, and between 6 and 9 of their mothers also do. Most of these deaths were likely preventable and resulted from improper feeding or hygiene. But Rankin's bill called for federal funding to state authorities to encourage instruction in maternal and infant hygiene. The bill failed, but a version of it was introduced by Congressman Morris Sheppard and Horace Towner in a new session of Congress back in April. The difference between the first bill and this one is that women now have full enfranchisement. During the 1920 election, the League of Women Voters ensured that virtually all the significant parties endorsed a maternity bill. They were not able to get the Republican Party to do so, but Republican candidate Warren Harding still came out in support of one, and as we know, he won the election. So Sheppard and Towner introduced the bill in April, and a huge lobbying effort began to ensure that it passed. The Women's Joint Congressional Committee, WJCC, was formed last year by a coalition of women's organizations, including the League of Women Voters, and they ensured that letters were sent to members of Congress, that activists testified on the floor, and that endorsements were published in all of the major women's magazines. Both the morality and the career prospects of the voting politicians were appealed to. One activist testified to Congress that anyone voting against the bill would be equal to King Herod in their murder of infants. And congressmen were consistently told that every woman in their district would vote against them if they didn't pass the bill. All this resulted in the landslide victory of 279 to 39 in the House of Representatives and 63 to 7 in the Senate. President Harding signs it into law on November 23rd. The act gives each participating state $5,000 to spend on public health programs and then matches any further state spending dollar for dollar. States have to pass their own enabling legislation to receive the funds. Of the 48 states, only Connecticut, Illinois, and Massachusetts will refuse. Although you might not have guessed it from the final results, there was actually significant opposition to the bill, and its critics won't go away in the years to come. It comes from states' rights advocates who see the act as evidence of intruding federal control, Catholic organizations who see it as an attack on the family, and anti-communists who see it as a step towards socialism. The American Medical Association led the campaign against Sheppard-Towner and continues to do so even after it is passed, declaring in May 1922 that it is an imported socialistic scheme unsuited to our form of government. All this will mean that when the act comes up for renewal in 1926, there will be much more organized resistance against it. With politicians no longer so fearful of the women's vote, it will only be extended for another 2 years, expiring for good in 1929. The act will contribute to a drop in infant and maternal mortality, although rates have been on a downward trend anyway and will continue dropping even after 1929. Tangible achievements aside, its historical significance lies in the fact that it's a landmark in the history of the American welfare system, passed in a time of political conservatism. Over in Europe, women's suffrage has also set the course for a future welfare state. In Sweden, on October 13th, Hjalmar Branting takes up the post of prime minister for the second time in his career. His Social Democrats returned in September as the biggest party in the second chamber of the Riksdag. The Social Democrats came to power last year, but that was when women did not yet have equal voting rights to men. See, the Riksdag approved universal suffrage in 1919, but it only came into effect this year. Sweden is actually the last Nordic country to institute universal suffrage. Finland did so in 1906, when it was still a Grand Duchy in the Russian Empire, Norway in 1913, and Denmark and Iceland in 1915. Branting was one of the founders of the party and its first MP, and he is renowned worldwide for his commitment to peace and international cooperation, sharing the Nobel Peace Prize with Norwegian Christian Lange this year for their work in bringing their countries into the League of Nations. Branting has also led the developing party program of a pragmatic relationship to Marxism and gradual socialist reforms within liberal democracy. But despite the Social Democrats gaining power, they won't do a whole lot for now. And Swedish politics is actually generally pretty unstable at this time. Democracy is new to the country, and it will go through 10 weak governments from 1919 to 1932, each one without much of a long-term plan. Sweden will also be famous across Europe for its number of industrial disputes, strikes, and lockouts. But when the Social Democrats come to power again in 1932, They will have an innovative platform, one that gives them 44 years of almost uninterrupted rule as they institute the Swedish model. More on that when it actually happens. Here are some notes to round off 1921. The first official Poppy Day takes place in Britain and her dominions and colonies on Remembrance Day, November 11th, after already being used on Memorial Day in the US in May. Since they started growing on the Western Front's muddy battlefields during the Great War, poppies have become a symbol of remembrance throughout the Allied countries. The idea of artificial ones to either wear or to place comes from teacher and fundraiser Madame Guérin, who worked with French widows and orphans to raise money for their devastated homes. Also in England, the governing body for football, the FA, bans women from playing on all affiliated pitches, declaring that the game of football is quite unsuitable for females and ought not be encouraged. Another backward-seeming move out of England comes with John William Gott's sentencing to prison on blasphemy charges in December, the last British person to be so charged. His specific crime, selling literature on birth control. And so ends 1921. The welfare state will be a pretty common feature of the industrialized world. So it's pretty interesting to see its development here. It's also going to be pretty controversial, but political debate aside, it is undeniable that it is another example of how rapid the state of political change is, even in relatively stable democracies such as the United States. Women gaining the vote forced through an historic shift in the role of the federal government in a matter of years. And now, in the coming years in America and beyond, this rate of change will only quicken. If you'd like to learn about Roosevelt's role in remilitarizing America in the run-up to World War II, you can watch our Season 1 video on that right here. And remember that if you've had your eye on this tie, as I've been talking and moving around and stuff, then you can go and find it at Indy's Tie Barn, where I auction off all the various and super attractive and sometimes just plain nutty neck pieces that I wear on our various Time Ghost channels. Links should be popping up around now, and there'll definitely be some below. And our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Spencer Hunt. It is the funding by the Time Ghost Army that makes all of this possible. So do what Spencer did and join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com and timeghost.tv. So, poppies for remembrance. Virginia Woolf had other images connected to that flower. She was like a crinkled poppy with a desire to drink dry dust. Now that's really depressing. It's already... That's okay. That's a Virginia Woolf quote.
Yeah.
Is it about her? Or did she say it?
No, she wrote it.
She wrote. Oh yeah, of course she wrote it. But and that's the ending for this episode.
I'm afraid it is. Yeah.
That's not a very good ending.
Well,
who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf. Huh?
That's better.
Yeah, it's a really good play too. If you've never got a chance to see it, I think you can get it. I think it might even be public domain. So.
Well,
read that. Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. Well, cheers, don't you know, darling.
To Virginia.
To Virginia Woolf. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was.
Good.
You can stop running now.